Imagine thinking you've won. For Ethan, this was his victory dinner, out with his new, younger girlfriend, celebrating the life he'd chosen. He had moved on. He had upgraded. But across the glistening restaurant, he sees a ghost from his past, his ex-wife, Claire. And she's not just surviving. She's radiant. He watches, frozen in a haze of jealousy and disbelief, as one of the richest men in Asia gets down on one knee and asks her to be his wife. This isn't just a story about a chance encounter. It's about the ultimate power play, and the moment a man realizes he didn't just lose his wife, he lost himself. Now, let's dive in. The air in the Saigon Etoile was thick with the scent of money and white truffle oil. Perched atop the 68th floor of the Bitexco Financial Tower, the restaurant was a glittering jewel box suspended over the sprawling, chaotic beauty of Ho Chi Minh City. Below, the relentless river of motorbikes flowed like arteries of light, but up here, there was only the serene clinking of crystal cutlery and the hushed, important murmurs of the city's elite. Ethan Blake felt a familiar surge of satisfaction settle in his chest. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored Xenia suit, the silk brushing against his new Patek Philippe. This was his world. He had built it, brick by expensive brick, on the foundations of shrewd real estate deals and a ruthless understanding of human ambition. Across the table, Madison Taylor laughed, a sound like wind chimes that always seemed perfectly timed to draw the attention of nearby diners. She was 24, a decade younger than Ethan, with the kind of flawless, poreless skin and doe-eyed beauty that seemed genetically engineered for Instagram. She angled her phone, capturing the reflection of the city lights in her champagne flute. "Isn't this just perfect, baby?" she cooed, her thumb swiping expertly across the screen. "Rooftop vibes, luxury life, Bart's best boyfriend." Ethan smiled, a practiced, easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Only the best for you, Madison." He had met her 6 months after his divorce from Claire was finalized. Madison was a breath of fresh, uncomplicated air. She didn't challenge him. She didn't have those long, contemplative silences that he'd grown to despise. She admired his success, celebrated his wealth, and, most importantly, made him feel like the powerful man he'd always wanted to be. She was the prize that proved he'd made the right choice. Leaving Claire, he told himself for the 1,000th time, was not a failure. It was an upgrade, an essential strategic shedding of dead weight. He glanced around the room, a king surveying his court. He recognized a banking executive here, a shipping magnate there. He nodded discreetly, a subtle flex of his social standing. And then, his eyes snagged on a figure by the panoramic window. The world tilted on its axis. It was Claire. His Claire. No, not his Claire anymore, just Claire. She was turned away from him, her back to the room, silhouetted against the glittering cityscape. He would know that silhouette anywhere. The graceful curve of her neck, the way her dark hair was swept up, revealing the delicate nape he once loved to kiss. She was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It wasn't flashy like Madison's sequined cocktail number. It was something more potent, understated, confident, utterly self-possessed. A cold, unfamiliar feeling coiled in his gut. It wasn't just surprise. It was annoyance, an invasion. This was his place, his victory lap. What was she doing here? She had never liked places like this. She'd called them soulless, preferring a hole-in-the-wall faux stall in District 3 with its plastic stools and explosive flavors. "Baby? Ethan?" Madison's voice broke through his stupor. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. He forced his gaze back to Madison, to her bright, uncreased face, but the image of Claire was burned onto his retinas. He couldn't help it. His eyes kept drifting back to that table by the window. She wasn't alone. A man sat across from her. Ethan couldn't see his face clearly, just the back of a well-tailored suit and a head of distinguished silver-flecked hair. They weren't talking much. They were just being. There was a comfortable stillness between them, a stark contrast to the performative chatter at his own table. Claire laughed, a soft, genuine sound that the restaurant's acoustics almost swallowed. But Ethan heard it. He felt it in his bones. It was the laugh she used to share with him, in the early days, before his ambition had consumed everything. An ugly, possessive thought flared in his mind. Who is he? Some mid-level expat manager? A boring architect she met at one of her charity things? He mentally sized the man up, a habit from his business dealings. The suit was quality, but that meant little. Claire had no concept of money or status, he reminded himself. That had been one of their biggest problems. She was content with her small world of historical building preservation and academic papers. She didn't understand the drive, the hunger, that fueled him. Is that? Madison squinted, following his gaze. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh my God, is that your ex-wife? Ethan flinched. The words ex-wife from Madison's lips felt like a violation. It is, he clipped out. Madison's eyes glittered with a predatory curiosity. Wow, small world. She looks different. She looks the same, Ethan snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. No, I mean... Madison tilted her head, analyzing. She looks more polished. I always pictured her as more mousy, from what you said. Ethan didn't reply. He had painted a picture of Claire for Madison, a narrative that suited his version of events. A dowdy, unambitious woman who couldn't keep up with him, who held him back with her simple needs and moralistic judgments. Seeing her here, radiating a quiet luminescence that had nothing to do with him, felt like a personal betrayal of that narrative. He watched as the man across from her reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt of pure, uncut jealousy through Ethan. He had held that hand. He had placed a ring on that finger. The memory was so vivid it was almost a physical pain. He could feel the fine bones of her hand in his, the coolness of her skin. He felt Madison's hand on his arm. Don't worry, baby. You definitely traded up. She winked, trying to be reassuring, but it just felt cheap. The dinner continued, but the taste of the Wagyu steak had turned to ash in Ethan's mouth. The champagne was flat. Every laugh from Madison seemed shrill, every touch an irritation. His focus was a laser beam directed at the table by the window. He was a man watching a foreign film without subtitles, desperately trying to understand the plot. And then, the moment came. The moment that would cleave his life into a new before and after. The silver-haired man stood up. He was tall, with a bearing of effortless authority. He moved around the table to stand beside Claire. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. Ethan's heart began to hammer against his ribs. No, it can't be. The man's face was turned slightly towards them now, and a jolt of recognition, cold and sharp, shot through Ethan. It was Alexander Grant. Not an Alexander Grant. The Alexander Grant. The British-American tech mogul, the billionaire philanthropist, the man whose face was on the cover of Forbes last month. A man whose net worth was so stratospheric it made Ethan's considerable wealth look like pocket change. Alexander Grant was a legend, a titan. He didn't just move in the circles Ethan aspired to. He created them. And he was now getting down on one knee, in front of Claire. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The ambient chatter died away. Every eye was on the couple by the window. Alexander Grant opened a small velvet box. Even from across the room, the diamond inside caught the light and exploded into 1,000 tiny suns. It wasn't just a ring, it was a star. Alexander's voice was too low to hear, but his expression was one of profound, unguarded sincerity. He wasn't performing. He was utterly focused on the woman before him. Claire's hands flew to her mouth, Her eyes, which Ethan knew could hold oceans of emotion, glistened with tears. She stared at Alexander, then at the ring, then back at Alexander. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it physically hurt Ethan to witness. She nodded, just a small, simple nod. The restaurant erupted in spontaneous, polite applause. Madison gasped next to him, her phone already up, forgotten in her lap a moment ago, now recording the scene. "Oh my God, Ethan! That's Alexander Grant! He's proposing to your ex-wife!" Ethan didn't hear her. He was frozen, a statue carved from disbelief and a suffocating, crushing sense of powerlessness. The power imbalance, the one he had so carefully cultivated his entire adult life, the one that had defined his relationship with Claire, had just been inverted with the force of a nuclear explosion. He wasn't the winner. He wasn't the one who had upgraded. He was the man who had thrown away a diamond, only to watch, from a distance, as someone else picked it up and recognized it as a star. In that moment, sitting beside his pretty, vapid prize, surrounded by the trappings of a success that suddenly felt hollow, Ethan Blake felt like the poorest man in the world. The morning light in Claire's apartment in District 2 was soft and forgiving. It filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, gentle shadows across the polished concrete floors. The space was a reflection of her. Minimalist, warm, and filled with purpose. Books on architectural theory and historical preservation were stacked in neat piles. Her own sketches and blueprints were pinned to a large corkboard, intricate drawings of restored colonial villas and innovative, sustainable community spaces. The diamond on her left hand felt impossibly heavy. It sat on her finger, a foreign celestial body that hadn't yet integrated into her orbit. Last night felt like a dream, a beautiful, overwhelming, terrifying dream. The hushed awe of the restaurant, the sincere weight of Alexander's words, the impossible sparkle of the ring. She made coffee, the familiar ritual grounding her. The rich, dark aroma of Trung Nguyen beans filled her small kitchen. She had said yes. In that moment, with Alexander's earnest, kind eyes looking at her, it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. He saw her, not as an accessory, not as a project, but as a partner. He listened to her talk about the structural integrity of a 19th-century French balustrade with the same rapt attention he gave to a quarterly earnings report. But now, in the quiet of the morning, the doubts crept in. They were the ghosts of her past, whispering insecurities she thought she had vanquished. A billionaire. What could a billionaire possibly see in you? The quiet architect who prefers dusty archives to gala dinners? The whispers had a voice. They sounded like Ethan. She sank onto a soft linen armchair, cupping the warm mug in her hands. She couldn't stop herself from seeing him. His face, across the restaurant last night. She had only caught a glimpse of him as she and Alexander were leaving, swept up in a cloud of congratulations from strangers. But she saw him. The shock on his face. The way his smile was frozen. A brittle mask. Beside him, a young, beautiful girl stared, her phone held aloft like a tiny weapon. Seeing him hadn't brought the searing pain it once would have. Instead, it was like looking at a stranger who happened to wear a familiar face. The man she had loved, or thought she had loved, was gone. He had been erased, layer by painful layer, by years of subtle dismissals and quiet betrayals. Flashback, 2 years ago. The air in their minimalist, glass-walled house in Thao Dien had been stale with unspoken words. Ethan was late. Again. Claire had cooked his favorite dish, bun cha, the fragrant aroma of grilled pork and herbs now faded and cold. She was sitting at the large oak dining table they had bought on their honeymoon in Denmark, tracing the wood grain with her finger. She had just received the news that her proposal to lead the restoration of the old Saigon Opera House had been accepted. It was the culmination of years of work, her doctoral thesis brought to life. She was bursting to tell him when he finally walked in just before midnight. The smell of expensive perfume that wasn't hers clung to him like a second skin. He didn't notice the food. He didn't notice the hopeful, expectant look on her face. "Long day," he grunted, loosening his tie and heading straight for the bar. "I have some good news," she began, her voice small. "Great," he said, pouring a large scotch. He looked at her, but his eyes were vacant. "Listen, Claire, I'm exhausted. Can it wait?" "It's about the Opera House project. I got it. I'm the lead architect." He paused, glass halfway to his lips. He blinked, as if trying to process information that didn't involve stock prices or zoning permits. "Oh, right. The old building thing. That's nice. Good for you. Nice, good for you." The words were like stones dropped into a deep well. Her monumental achievement, the project that made her soul sing, was reduced to a passing compliment, a pat on the head. "It's a big deal, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a national heritage site." I know, he said impatiently. "But it's not exactly going to pay for this house, is it? It's a passion project, a hobby." That was when she knew. It wasn't a single dramatic moment of finding a lipstick-stained collar. It was this slow, corrosive acid of dismissal. The way he systematically devalued everything that she was, everything that wasn't a reflection of him or his ambition. Her work was a hobby. Her friends were boring academics. Her contentment was a lack of drive. He had been chipping away at her sense of self for years, so gradually she hadn't even noticed until she was hollowed out. The affair, which she discovered a month later through a conveniently left-open laptop, was not the disease. It was merely a symptom of the man he had become, someone who needed constant external validation, someone for whom a loyal, intelligent, loving partner was simply not enough. She had to be a trophy, and when she refused to be polished and placed on his shelf, he had simply gone out and found a shinier one. The divorce was quiet and brutally efficient. He thought he was being generous, letting her keep the small apartment and giving her a settlement that, to him, was a rounding error. He didn't realize he was giving her the one thing she truly needed: her freedom. The freedom to breathe, the freedom to be. End flashback. Claire took a shaky breath, the memory still holding a faint, phantom ache. Her journey back to herself had been an architectural one. She had to survey the wreckage, clear the debris of Ethan's opinions and expectations, and then, slowly, carefully, rebuild her life on a new foundation. A foundation of her own making. That foundation was her work. She poured all her pain, her focus, and her love into stone and plaster and glass. She won awards. She gave lectures. She found her voice again, not just as an architect, but as a woman. She met Alexander Grant not at a party, but at a work site. He was the anonymous benefactor behind the cultural foundation that had funded her opera house project. He'd shown up one afternoon, unannounced, wearing jeans and a simple linen shirt, his shoes covered in dust. He hadn't introduced himself as a billionaire. He had introduced himself as Alexander, an admirer of classical Vietnamese architecture. They talked for 3 hours, walking through the scaffolding-clad skeleton of the grand old building. He didn't just listen. He heard. He asked intelligent questions about load-bearing walls and the chemical composition of the original French paint. He saw the passion Ethan had dismissed as a hobby, and he recognized it as genius. Their courtship was a slow build. Lunches that turned into long afternoons discussing art and history. Walks along the Saigon River. He never once made her feel like she was unequal to him. His wealth was a fact of his life, like the color of his eyes, not the definition of his character. He was a man who had built an empire, but had never lost his curiosity. A man who had everything but was searching for something real. A ping from her phone pulled her back to the present. It was a message from Alexander. "Good morning, my brilliant fiancé. I hope you slept well. I'm still floating. Are you okay? I know last night was a lot." His concern was so genuine, so attuned to her, it made her heart ache in a good way. It was the polar opposite of Ethan's self-absorbed obliviousness. She typed back, her fingers steady now. "I'm more than okay. I'm just trying to figure out how to work a laptop with this beautiful star on my finger. Good morning to you too." As she hit send, she looked at the ring again. It wasn't a cage. It wasn't a brand of ownership. It was a promise from a man who had seen the building of her life, admired its structure, and wanted to build a future in it with her. And in that moment, she realized with stunning clarity that the ghost of Ethan Blake no longer had a voice. She had finally, completely, evicted him from the premises. Her past was a historical site she could visit and learn from, but she no longer had to live there. Her future was a new blueprint, and it was time to start building. The 24 hours following the proposal were a slow-motion car crash for Ethan. He went through the motions of his life, but everything was distorted, as if viewed through a shattered windshield. He'd woken up in his sprawling penthouse, the sheets smelling of Madison's cloyingly sweet perfume. She was still asleep, one arm thrown over her face to block the morning sun, her phone lying on the bedside table, screen cracked from where she'd dropped it in her excitement last night. He remembered her incessant high-pitched chatter on the ride home. "Can you believe it? Claire? With Alexander Grant? How did that even happen? She must be the world's greatest gold digger. You had a lucky escape, baby. Imagine having to compete with that." He had just grunted in response, his mind a maelstrom of rage, humiliation, and a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion. Regret. Now standing in his state-of-the-art office overlooking the city, he couldn't focus on the acquisition reports glowing on his triple monitor setup. All he could see was the look on Claire's face, the pure, unadulterated joy. A joy he hadn't been able to elicit from her in years. He had told himself it was because she was incapable of it, that she was passionless. The memory of her smile last night was a brutal refutation of that lie. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Blake, your 10 a.m. with the board from Vena Capital is here." "Delay them. 15 minutes," he barked, cutting off his assistant before she could reply. He swiveled his chair to face the window, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms. He had always been the winner. In school, in sports, in business. Breaking up with Claire was framed in his mind as another win. He was shedding a liability. He was moving on to bigger and better things. Madison, with her youth and her social media savvy, was part of that package. She was visible proof of his success. But Alexander Grant operated on a different planet. Ethan had spent his life climbing a mountain, only to look up and see Claire standing on the moon. The power imbalance was what gnawed at him most viciously. In their marriage, he had held all the cards: the money, the social connections, the louder voice. He had controlled their lifestyle, their circle of friends, their future. He had made her feel small, and her smallness had made him feel big. It was a sick, unspoken symbiosis he had only just begun to understand the mechanics of, now that it was gone. Now she was engaged to a man who could buy and sell Ethan's entire company as a whim, a man whose name opened doors that Ethan couldn't even find the key for. Claire, his quiet, unassuming ex-wife, now held a power he could never hope to match. It was infuriating. It was emasculating. He opened his browser and typed Alexander Grant into the search bar. He scrolled past the hagiographic articles in Forbes and Bloomberg. He was looking for dirt. A scandal. A weakness, anything to level the playing field, to reassure himself that this perfect picture was a facade. He found the usual. Genius programmer, sold his first company at 22, built a global tech empire, now focused on philanthropy through the Grant Foundation. Widowed 10 years ago, his first wife, a university sweetheart, died of cancer. No children. Famously private. Ethan's jaw tightened. Even the man's backstory was noble. He clicked on the Grant Foundation's website. He navigated to the Cultural Heritage Project section. And there she was, Claire's face, smiling out from a professional headshot. Dr. Claire Bennett, lead architectural historian and restoration project manager. Her bio was extensive. It listed her degrees, her publications in prestigious academic journals, the awards she had won for her work, awards he hadn't even known about. He read about her pioneering work in sustainable preservation, a term he'd never heard her use. He saw pictures of her on site at the Opera House, confident and authoritative in a hard hat, pointing at blueprints. This wasn't the woman he had divorced. The woman he remembered was quiet, bookish, and in his mind, slightly lost. This woman was a force, an expert, a leader. The terrifying thought occurred to him. Had she always been this woman? Had he just refused to see her? His phone buzzed. A text from Madison, a string of heart and shopping bag emojis. Thinking we need a retail therapy session to celebrate your lucky escape. He stared at the message, and for the first time felt a wave of profound irritation. The emptiness of it, the sheer superficiality, was suddenly suffocating. He thought of the deep, meaningful conversations he used to have with Claire about art, politics, and history. Conversations he had eventually shut down because they didn't contribute to his bottom line. He spent the rest of the day in a fugue state. He was sharp and dismissive in his meeting, making his board members flinch. He snapped at his assistant for bringing him the wrong kind of mineral water. He was a man possessed, driven by a phantom jealousy that was rapidly metastasizing into an obsession. That evening, Madison was preening in front of the mirror, getting ready for a gallery opening. "Should I wear the Valentino or the Chanel?" she asked, holding up two dresses that were virtually indistinguishable to Ethan. "I'm not going," he said, his voice flat. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his work suit, scrolling endlessly through articles about Alexander Grant. Madison turned, her perfectly made-up face falling. "What do you mean you're not going? We promised the curator we'd be there. It's important for my brand." "I have work to do," he lied. "Work? Ethan, you've been glued to your phone all day, looking at pictures of your ex-wife and her new fiancé. It's pathetic." The word hit him like a slap. Pathetic. He stood up, his body rigid with fury. "What did you just say to me?" Madison, for once, didn't back down. Her fear was eclipsed by her own brand of indignation. "I said it's pathetic. You're acting like you lost something. You told me she was boring. You told me she held you back. So why are you acting like a lovesick teenager now that she's moved on? Is it just because he's richer than you?" Her words, though meant to be insulting, were a scalpel that sliced straight to the truth. And the truth hurt. It wasn't just about the money. It was about worth. Alexander Grant hadn't just given Claire a ring. He had validated her in a way Ethan never could, or never bothered to. He had shown the world, and Ethan, the value of the very things Ethan had disdained. "You don't know anything," he snarled, a cornered animal. "I know that I am your girlfriend," she shot back, her voice rising. "I'm the one who's supposed to be on your arm, but you're so obsessed with her you can't even see me anymore. What am I, Ethan? Just a placeholder? A prop to make you feel better about yourself?" He had no answer. Because in that moment, he realized she was right. Madison was a bandage he had slapped over a deep, septic wound. And now, the bandage had been ripped off, and he was forced to look at the infection festering beneath. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What?" I said, "Get out. Go to your party. I don't care. I just need some space." Madison stared at him, her eyes welling with tears of anger and hurt. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking. "Fine. But when you finally get over your little ego trip, don't expect me to be waiting." She slammed the door on her way out. The sound echoed in the vast, empty penthouse. Ethan was alone, utterly alone with his success, his wealth, and the gaping cavernous hole in his life that he was just beginning to understand had been shaped exactly like Claire. He sank back onto the bed, the winner of a game he now realized he had never even understood the rules of. And he had lost. Epically. 2 weeks passed. For Ethan, they were weeks of quiet, simmering obsession. His work suffered. His relationship with Madison was a cold war of terse text messages and resentful silences. He had hired a private investigator. It was a petty, desperate move, and he knew it. He told himself it was due diligence, a way to protect Claire from a potential predator. But deep down, he knew he was just digging for a weapon, any piece of information that could tarnish Alexander Grant's perfect image and, by extension, justify his own past actions. The investigator's report was disappointingly clean. Alexander Grant was exactly who he appeared to be, a brilliant, ruthless but fair businessman and a genuinely dedicated philanthropist. The only remotely interesting detail was a heavily redacted file on a hostile takeover from 15 years ago. It involved a smaller tech startup that had been absorbed by Grant's empire. The founder had been financially ruined. It was aggressive, but not illegal. It wasn't the smoking gun Ethan had hoped for. He needed to see her. He needed to talk to her. He manufactured a reason, a loose end from their divorce he claimed his lawyers needed to tie up. It was a flimsy pretext, but it was enough. She agreed to meet him, not at a cafe, but on her own turf. The address she gave him was for the Imperial Citadel of Thang Long in Hanoi, a place he hadn't visited since he was a child. She was in the city for a week, overseeing a new preservation assessment for her foundation. He found her in the shadow of the Qin Tian Palace, standing before the ancient stone dragons that guarded its entrance. The air was hot and humid, thick with the weight of 1,000 years of history. She was dressed simply, in linen trousers and a light cotton shirt, her hair tied back. She held a notebook and was deep in conversation with a Vietnamese historian, pointing at the worn filigree on the dragon's flank. She looked up as he approached. The easy confidence she had radiated on sight in the photos was even more palpable in person. There was no flicker of old pain in her eyes, no residual fear. Just a calm, neutral appraisal. "Ethan," she said, her voice even. She dismissed the historian politely, turning her full attention to him. "Thank you for coming all this way." "Claire," he said, his own voice sounding hollow in the vast open space. "You look well." It was a stupid, inadequate thing to say. "I am well," she replied, a statement of fact, not a polite pleasantry. "You said there was a legal matter?" He launched into his prepared lie, something about a shared asset they had overlooked. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she simply nodded. "Okay, send the paperwork to my lawyer. Her contact details are the same." She made to turn away, back to her work. "Wait," he said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. That's not the only reason I came." She paused, her gaze steady. "I suspected as much." He floundered for a moment, the carefully constructed walls of his anger and arrogance crumbling under her calm gaze. "This man," he began. "Alexander Grant. Do you even know who he is? What he's capable of?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Claire's lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was one of weary recognition. "I know exactly who he is, Ethan. He's the man who funded the restoration of the Saigon Opera House. He's the man who reads my research papers and understands them. He's a kind, decent man who loves me for who I am, not for who he wants me to be." Each word was a precise, surgical cut. She was laying bare the entire history of their failure without ever raising her voice. "Kind and decent?" Ethan scoffed, regaining a sliver of his old bluster. He pulled out his phone, holding it up like a shield. "I did some digging. 15 years ago, he destroyed a man named David Chen, a startup called Innovate Dynamics. He drove him into bankruptcy. Is that the work of a kind and decent man?" He expected shock, anger, doubt. He got none of it. Claire's expression softened with what looked, impossibly, like pity. I know all about David Chen, Ethan. Alexander told me about it on our third date. It's the biggest regret of his business career. He was young, he was aggressive, and he was wrong. He spent the next 5 years personally mentoring David, helping him build a new, even more successful company. They're friends. David and his wife are coming to our wedding. The ground beneath Ethan's feet seemed to dissolve. His weapon had not only misfired, it had turned to dust in his hand. He was left standing there, exposed, his petty motives laid bare. "Why are you doing this, Ethan?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Why are you trying to sabotage my happiness?" "I'm not! I'm trying to protect you!" he insisted, the lie tasting sour in his mouth. "No, you're not," she said, taking a step closer. The power imbalance had never been so stark, but this time, it was entirely in her favor. She was the one with the high ground, standing amidst the stone relics of a history she understood, while he was lost in the ruins of a present he had wrecked. "You're not protecting me. You're trying to reclaim a narrative, the one where you were the winner and I was the sad little woman you left behind. You can't stand the fact that I didn't just survive without you. I thrived. You can't stand that another man, a man you secretly admire, saw value in all the parts of me you threw away like scrap." He stared at her, speechless. She saw him so clearly it was terrifying. She had diagnosed his sickness with pinpoint accuracy. The power imbalance in our marriage. "I let you have it, Ethan," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I thought if I made myself smaller, you would feel bigger. If I dimmed my own light, yours would shine brighter. That was my mistake. But I've learned from it. I will never, ever make myself small for anyone again." She looked at him, one last time, and all the neutrality was gone. In its place was a profound, heartbreaking finality. "I truly hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan. But I need you to understand this. It isn't with me. It never will be again. Do not contact me again unless it is through our lawyers. Goodbye." She turned and walked away, her figure receding into the ancient, sun-drenched courtyard, leaving Ethan standing alone with the ghosts of kings and the rubble of his own making. He had come here seeking to expose a hidden motive, to reassert his dominance. Instead, his own pathetic hidden motives had been laid bare, and he was forced to confront the one truth he had spent years avoiding. The problem in his marriage wasn't that Claire was not enough. It was that he was. The gala for the Pan-Asian Architectural Excellence Awards was the most anticipated event of the year in Singapore. It was held at the iconic Marina Bay Sands, a monument to modern ambition. Tonight, however, the spotlight was on history. The grand prize was widely expected to go to the team behind the Saigon Opera House restoration. It was to be Claire's crowning achievement, a public validation of the work that had been her salvation. Ethan wasn't invited, but getting a ticket was a simple matter of a large donation to one of the event's sponsors. He was there with a singular, toxic purpose. His confrontation with Claire at the Citadel had shattered his delusions, but in their place, a darker resolve had formed. If he couldn't have her, if he couldn't be the hero of his own story, he would become the antagonist in hers. He would burn it all down. He had spent a fortune digging deeper into the David Chen affair, finding disgruntled ex-employees of Innovate Dynamics, paying them for any sliver of damaging information. He had pieced together a narrative, a twisted, exaggerated version of the truth, full of words like ruthless, predatory, and destroyed. He'd fed the story to a notoriously sleazy online journalist known for high-profile takedowns. The article was timed to drop at exactly 9 p.m., just as the main award was being presented. His plan was simple: create a scandal so public, so humiliating, that it would stain Claire's perfect night and force her to question the character of the man she was about to marry. He watched from a table in the back as Claire moved through the crowd. She was breathtaking in a gown of deep emerald silk, a custom design by a Vietnamese couturier. She wasn't wearing much jewelry besides the engagement ring, which seemed to pull all the light in the room towards it. Alexander was by her side, not shadowing her, but standing as an equal partner. They greeted architects, philanthropists, and government ministers. They were a power couple in the truest sense of the word. Their power derived not just from wealth, but from mutual respect and shared purpose. Ethan felt a pang of something so bitter it almost made him gag. Madison had finally left him last week. Her parting words had been eerily similar to Claire's. "You're in love with a ghost, Ethan. I can't compete with that." He was now truly alone. The award ceremony began. Project after project was celebrated. Finally, the main event arrived. The presenter, a famed Japanese architect, spoke glowingly of the Saigon Opera House. A project that doesn't just restore a building, but resurrects a soul. Led by the visionary Dr. Claire Bennett. A photo of Claire, smiling in her hard hat, filled the giant screens on stage. The room applauded warmly. "And we are honored to have the project's primary benefactor with us tonight," the presenter continued. "A man whose commitment to preserving culture is as formidable as his business acumen, Mr. Alexander Grant." As Claire and Alexander made their way to the stage, Ethan's phone vibrated. 9:00 p.m. It was done. The link to the article was live. He watched with a sick thrill as, around the room, phones began to light up. A murmur rippled through the audience. Whispers started to spread like a virus. On stage, Claire accepted the heavy, sculptural award. She stepped up to the microphone, her face luminous with joy. "Thank you. This is an incredible honor. This project was a labor of love for so many people." She paused. She could feel the shift in the room, the subtle change in energy. She glanced at Alexander, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. His own phone had buzzed in his pocket. He already knew. Claire looked out at the sea of faces, at the hundreds of tiny screens glowing in the dark. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity. The old Claire would have faltered. The old Claire would have crumbled. But she was not the old Claire. She took a deep breath, her eyes finding Ethan in the back of the room. Their gazes locked for a fraction of a second. She saw the pathetic, triumphant sneer on his face. And in that moment, she understood everything. She put down her prepared speech. "Before I thank my team," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the whispers, "I want to address something. It seems a story has just been published about my fiancé, Alexander." A collective gasp went through the room. Alexander placed a supportive hand on the small of her back. He hadn't asked her to do this. He hadn't needed to. They were a team. "The story you are now reading on your phones," Claire continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned audience, "is about a difficult time in his past. A business deal from 15 years ago. It's a story he told me himself, with great regret, very early in our relationship. It's a story about a mistake, but what that story fails to mention is the more important part. It fails to mention the years he spent making amends. It fails to mention the friendship that was forged from the ashes of that conflict. It fails to mention the lesson in grace and humility that he learned. A lesson that shaped the philanthropist he is today." She turned to Alexander, her eyes full of love and unwavering trust. "I am marrying a man who is not perfect. I am marrying a man who has made mistakes. And I am so incredibly grateful for that. Because I am also not perfect. And I have also made mistakes. Our lives are not a press release. They are messy, and they are complicated. And true strength is not about having a flawless past. It's about having the courage to acknowledge your failures and build a better future." Then, her eyes found Ethan again. The sneer was gone from his face, replaced by a look of utter shock. He had expected her to be a victim of the scandal. He never imagined she would become its conqueror. "There are those in the world," Claire said, her voice resonating with moral authority, "who believe power comes from tearing others down, who seek to find weakness and exploit it. They live in the shadows, feeding on negativity and resentment. But that is not strength. It is the hollowest form of weakness." The room was silent, captivated. "True power," she concluded, lifting the award slightly, "is this. It's building something beautiful. It's preserving history. It's admitting when you're wrong. It's standing by the people you love, not in spite of their flaws, but because of the grace with which they carry them. Thank you." She stepped back from the microphone. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then a single person began to clap. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving her a thunderous, roaring standing ovation. It wasn't just for the award anymore. It was for her courage, her integrity, her love. Ethan was frozen in his seat. The applause was a physical force, pressing down on him, suffocating him. His plan had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. He had tried to tarnish Claire and Alexander, but he had only succeeded in illuminating their strength and cementing their bond in front of the entire world. He was the one left exposed, a petty, bitter man sitting alone in the dark, as the woman he'd scorned received the adoration of hundreds. He had tried to be the antagonist, but he had ended up as something far worse, irrelevant. The aftermath of the awards gala was swift and decisive. The sleazy journalist's article, so thoroughly and publicly dismantled by Claire, became a case study in failed character assassination. Alexander's reputation, far from being tarnished, was enhanced. He was no longer just a brilliant billionaire. He was a man of character, capable of admitting fault. But the real star was Claire. She was lauded not just as a great architect, but as a woman of immense grace and strength. In trying to control her narrative, Ethan had lost control of his own, permanently. He fled Singapore the next morning, but he couldn't flee from himself. The standing ovation echoed in his ears. Claire's words played on a loop in his mind. That is not strength. It is the hollowest form of weakness. He was hollow. His penthouse felt like a mausoleum. His company, once the source of all his pride, felt like a collection of empty assets. He had spent his life accumulating things, money, status, a trophy girlfriend, only to realize he had no foundation. He was a beautiful, gleaming facade with nothing behind it. Hitting rock bottom was not a dramatic crash, but a slow, quiet sinking. He stopped going into the office. He stopped answering calls. He just sat in his silent apartment, the city lights twinkling below, and was forced, for the first time, to confront the man in the mirror. He saw the insecurity that drove his ambition. He saw the fear that made him belittle Claire's passions. He saw the profound emptiness that he had tried to fill with external validation. A month later, a simple cream-colored envelope arrived. There was no return address, but he knew who it was from. Inside was not a letter, but a wedding invitation. Alexander Grant and Dr. Claire Bennett request the pleasure of your company at their marriage ceremony. It was a small, private affair, to be held at a restored 17th century pagoda in Hoi An that Claire herself had helped to preserve. Tucked inside was a small, handwritten note on a separate card. It was from Claire. "Ethan, I don't expect you to come. To be honest, I don't want you to. But Alexander and I believe that closing a door is not the same as locking it with hatred. We are moving forward into a life of light and joy, and we wish you no ill will. We hope, one day, you find a way to move forward too. Find something to build, not just for status, but for your soul. It is the only architecture that lasts. Claire." He read the note 10 times. It was not an olive branch of reconciliation. It was an act of final, absolute grace. It was a release. She was not just closing the door on their past. She was handing him the key to his own future, if he was brave enough to use it. He didn't go to the wedding, but on that day, he did something else. He sold his flashy penthouse. He resigned as CEO of his company, promoting his more than capable second-in-command. He sold the Patek Philippe, the sports car, everything that had served as a prop for his fragile ego. With the money, he started a small, anonymous fund. Its mission was to provide seed capital for young, underprivileged entrepreneurs in rural Vietnam, the kind of people with passion projects and big ideas that the Ethan of old would have dismissed as a waste of time. He didn't put his name on it. He wasn't looking for credit. His life became quiet. He moved into a small, simple apartment in a less fashionable district. He started visiting the historical sites he had ignored his whole life. He read the books Claire used to love. He was, in a way, trying to excavate his own past, to understand the man he had been and the man he had failed to become. One rainy afternoon, a year later, he was sitting at a humble street-side cafe in the old quarter of Hanoi, sipping a coffee. He was reading a newspaper when he saw a picture. It was Claire and Alexander, opening a new community learning center they had funded. They stood side by side, their smiles easy and genuine. Claire was pregnant, her hand resting on a gentle swell beneath her dress. They were building a life, a family, a legacy. Ethan looked at the picture for a long time. There was no jealousy. There was no rage. The hollow ache that had haunted him for so long was finally gone. In its place was a quiet, bittersweet sense of peace. He had lost Claire. He had lost the life he thought he wanted. But in losing it all, he was finally beginning the slow, arduous process of finding himself. His redemption would not be a grand, public gesture. It would be a quiet, internal one. It was the lifelong project of building a foundation for his soul, just as she had advised. It was the only architecture that lasts, and for the first time, Ethan Blake was ready to start building. In the end, this was never a story about who won or who lost. It was a story about value. The value we see in others, and the value we must learn to find in ourselves. Claire's journey wasn't about landing a billionaire. It was about reclaiming her own worth that had been there all along. And Ethan's journey, a much harder and lonelier road, was about realizing that true wealth isn't what you own, but what you build within your own soul. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to find a solid foundation to build upon. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, as it truly helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone you think would appreciate a story of resilience and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the complexities of the human heart. What did you think of Ethan's final act? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Until next time.